No character has been played so many times by so many different people as Sherlock Holmes. He's been played brilliantly by many actors over the years.
My name is Sherlock Holmes. It is my business to know what other people don't know.
But other times, well...
Really, Watson, you excel yourself.
Sometimes the films are just plain bad.
So you still don't believe in monsters? The only monsters I believe in look very much like you or I.
Sometimes the actors are completely miscast. Not everyone is suitable to play the part.
The game is afoot.
It didn't take the gaming world long to realise the potential of Sherlock Holmes. The earliest game I'm aware of is a text adventure from back in the Commodore 64 days. Since then there have been many Holmes games. Infocom text adventures, the surprisingly brilliant Lost Files of Sherlock Holmes games, a few unsurprisingly dull casual games, and a set of interactive movies by the name of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Most recently, he's been the subject of a series of adventure games by the adventure game company Frogwares. They didn't get off to a good start with Mystery of the Mummy, a Myst-style first-person puzzle adventure that did just about everything wrong. The graphics were low resolution and blurry, the puzzles were badly implemented and unrelated to what little story there was, and Sherlock Holmes sounded more like Maxwell Smart.
Damn it! I do not have the 5th statuette! Oh, to lose after being so close to victory!
For the second game, Secret of the Silver Earring, they tried a more traditional third-person adventure, though a rather simplistic one. Generally all you needed to do was click on everything in the environment and Sherlock would make all the deductions for you. It did want you to sit an exam at the end of every section, though. The third game, The Awakened, takes things back into first-person perspective, but this time with full 3D movement. There are actually 2 versions of this game available now, the original and a remastered version which allows you to switch to a traditional third-person viewpoint. It's a welcome addition for anyone that wants it, and it could be helpful for those out there who get motion sickness from first-person games, but otherwise first-person is the way the game was intended. Some people insist adventure games should all be traditional third-person puzzle fests, but then, wouldn't it be boring if games never evolved? Not that it's evolved much. Despite the perspective, this is still a fairly traditional adventure. The main point of interest is that The Awakened tries to add elements from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos into the mix. This isn't a unique concept, it's been done many times before, perhaps most successfully by Neil Gaiman in his excellent story A Study in Emerald. The trouble is, despite its popularity, it's not necessarily a good match. The inherently logical nature of a Sherlock Holmes story clashes with the supernatural focus of Lovecraft. Gaiman got around this by setting his story in an alternate world where the existence of the old ones was an acknowledged fact. This game doesn't have that luxury. It doesn't really get to do much with its horror elements. It does have gruesome corpses, but then you get weird moments like these snakes crawling out from a dead body for no reason that's ever given, while Holmes and Watson just stand passively watching. But we're getting a bit ahead with things there. Pun not originally intended. The first thing you have to do in the game is walk the unrealistically clean streets of Victorian London to get to a bookshop. In the original version, London seemed to have a population of about 5 people, but there's been more background characters added to the remake. It does make it look a lot better, but it also leads to the usual moments where identical characters pass each other, or this guy who seems to just want to make himself dizzy. The bookshop itself highlights one of the issues the game has, and one that has plagued adventure games for years: pixel hunting. You're expected to find a particular book in the shop, and the only way to do it is to scan across all the books until you find the one you can use. The remastered version does improve on this, thankfully. It has the third-person perspective, which makes it easier to scan the whole scene, and there's also the ability to press the spacebar to highlight all the hotspots in the area to save having to waste time hunting through useless screens. The bookshop also lets Holmes show off his amazing deduction skills.
Those flowers need watering.
It's a good job too, since the original game was a nightmare in this regard. It's got so many things that are odd to find, such as this piece of cloth hung over the doorway, or this brown rope on top of a brown sack in the docks area, which I ran past so many times during the original game, and the docks are huge. At least in the remake they've made it stand out a bit more.
This old rope seems intense.
And while we're at the docks, at this point we're told we need to find the customs officer, so the logical place to look is the customs office. You get no luck heading there though, since there's just this note that you can't use. The game won't let you carry on until you go back to the pub and ask the barman where to find him, at which point he directs you to the customs office, and suddenly the note can be examined. Why would I have to do that? There's a massive sign on the wall saying customs, so why would I have to ask directions in order to continue? And while we're at it, take a look at the note here. Before I pick it up, it's this badly translated nonsense. The baby came to say to me that Sondra began giving birth and that she claims me. Claims you to be what? And a baby reporting on its own birth? That really is quite impressive. But when I examined it in the inventory, it's changed to a completely different translation that makes a bit more sense. That's just badly done, and neither of these things is fixed in the Remastered edition.
How strange.
In general, The Awakened does play out as a normal adventure game, and it also has all the idiosyncratic features of the genre, such as a propensity for picking up everything that isn't nailed down. Who but an adventure game character would see a lemon tree and say,
"This should prove useful,"
and pick the entire thing up and somehow shove it into their pocket? Or at this point, an entire wheeled table is crammed into the inventory. Aside from the normal point-and-click puzzles, it does throw in some more traditional challenges too, though they don't make much real-world sense. For instance, on a few occasions you have to pick a lock with a spoon for some reason. When you do, you get these puzzles where you have to move blocks of numbers around to get them in sequence. A perfectly good puzzle, but not much to do with lockpicking. There's also this sequence where you have to solve a clock puzzle from a newspaper to get the combination for a safe, and frankly the solution is so arbitrary that I find it hard to believe anyone is going to solve it without a guide, and I'm not exactly a novice when it comes to puzzles. The game does try to vary things a bit at times. In a section in New Orleans, your bag gets stolen and a chase commences.
Holmes, our bag! Thief! Stop! Thief!
This is also a good reason to stick to first-person view. It just doesn't work in third person. Pointing and clicking just doesn't provide the excitement for a chase scene. It needs the physicality of controlling the action directly. There's also a trip through a swamp where it turns out that rowing boats move in pretty much the same way as a walking detective. It does seem to include a playable version of window cleaning sim too. I'm sure it's not too far-fetched to think that might genuinely be made, considering the existence of Woodcutter Simulator and Roadworks Simulator. Yes, they are real games. There are times when you get to do some detective work, such as examining footprints and areas of crime scenes with a magnifying glass or analysing evidence back at Baker Street, but these never involve much more than simply clicking on everything. Later, Holmes will just reel off an entire scenario based on this stuff.
His profession, which will be the key. What part of London?
The end of chapter tests from the previous game are gone, but occasionally the game does throw a question at you. These are often quite tedious and finicky. It's at its worst when you have to identify who has taken a signet ring. It's not difficult. There was a raccoon hanging around earlier, and there's a page found that pretty much spells out that the raccoon will have taken it. Raccoon, of course, being spelled R-A-C-C-O-N, as shown in the game. Typing that gives nothing though, leaving me to spend ages trying to come up with an alternative answer, only to eventually discover that it wanted me to spell raccoon with a single C. Now that is a valid alternative spelling for raccoon, but both should be accepted, especially as the game spells it with a double C everywhere else, including in the subtitles in the conversation which immediately follows. That's just a load of...
Garlic excretia.
Thankfully, this is another thing that has been fixed in the remastered version.
The facts speak for themselves, Watson. What do an Edelweiss...
Another time, you're expected to identify that you need to go to Switzerland from a symbol of a cross and a reference to Edelweiss. At least when you get there, you get to see some characters with amusing names.
Kunz, throw him into the holding chamber.
The game makes some attempts at humour at times. There's a quite random scene on a train where a small boy gets Holmes to help him open a puzzle box, only for it then to be revealed that the child is Hercule Poirot, to whom Watson says,
"It is often necessary to use all of one's little grey cells to solve great mysteries."
Clever. Except for the fact that the game is set in 1894, and Poirot was already solving cases with the Belgian police in 1893. Though I've never been to Belgium, so for all I know it could be policed entirely by kids. Another thing that was fixed for the remastered version of the game was a creepy Watson bug, which provided some of the biggest scares in the original. You never saw Watson move, yet he always somehow turned up behind you. In the remastered version, Watson just follows you around normally. More sensible maybe, but less fun. The plot of the game takes you around the world from London to a mental asylum in Switzerland.
3 times 3 is 9. 2 times 5 is 10. I shall speak only to Professor Schwartz.
And I see your Schwartz is as big as mine.
To New Orleans.
All I see are 2 foreigners tearing up my wharf, making a lot of noise.
And finally to Pirate Caves.
Poor devil. Alcohol has killed him.
I think it's more likely that being hung up on a hook has killed him. You ultimately get to confront the camp, overacting members of the evil cult.
All that goes on in his head. I am Ashmat, true believer of the great old ones. Tremble, fools! I will fill you with lead and then stuff you with octopus!
Their intention is to unleash one of the old ones in order to destroy the world. What a bunch of...
Kunz!
I've already mentioned a lot of the changes in the remastered version. If you're going to play the game, then it's definitely the one to go for. The loading times are much faster and the graphics are slightly improved. Some bits have changed, such as when breaking into the warehouse at the docks. In the original, you had this part where you had to control the hook to unlock the door. This was removed completely in the remastered version for some reason. There are also moments in the original where you try to pick something up and are told it's of no use, but then you need it later on and have to go back for it. A lot of those have been changed for the remake so that you can pick the items up straight away, though not all of them have been caught. But it's the ability to highlight hotspots that's a main improvement, otherwise it's much the same game. The game as a whole has clearly had quite a lot of work put into it, but it's just not quite up to scratch. A lot of puzzles are fairly logical, but some have solutions so ridiculously obscure as to make the game frustrating. The plot works reasonably well, but the actual dialogue isn't too great. The voice acting isn't good enough to make it work either, with Holmes himself being one of the worst culprits, often sounding like the actor is simply reading the lines off the page for the first time.
We should give them no more. We must make our departure, but to what destination? Wait, Watson! I have a sudden thought.
The fact that the game got such good ratings amongst the adventure gaming community is more an indication of the general low standards set by modern point-and-click adventures than the quality of the game itself. But if we rave about games that are just slightly above average, as if they're masterpieces, there will be no incentive for developers to fix things, and the wider gaming community is just going to think the genre is hopeless. So, Sherlock Holmes The Awakened. Good effort, but must try harder.